of how the greatest detective who never lived changed the world, Sherlock Holmes.
Elementary, my dear Watson, elementary.
And how he did it happened in ways few could ever imagine. Space science.
The science we're doing here at NASA is really Holmes' 21st century.
Popular culture.
Of course, Sherlock Holmes has to meet Batman, because Sherlock Holmes is Batman. There would be no Batman without Sherlock Holmes.
Holmes haunts a lot of the popular culture of the 20th century.
Espionage.
Sherlock Holmes is the patron saint of intelligence analysis.
Forensic science.
The theory should fit the data, not the data fitting the theory. It's very Holmes. Yeah.
We live in a universe where Sherlock Holmes has left his mark everywhere.
Take 4.
Every few years, a fictional character reemerges and captures the imagination of a new generation.
The name's Sherlock Holmes and the address is 221B Baker Street.
Mark Gatiss is co-creator of the BBC series Sherlock.
He has a Victorian superpower, which still works in the modern day. I think essentially it comes down to the fact that he is the smartest man in the room. He can make the connections nobody else can, and that is timeless.
When you read his study in Scarlet, and Holmes is introduced to Watson, and he says,
Afghanistan or Iraq?
and Watson's, how the devil did you know that? And Holmes said, by the way, you're limping.
I know you're an army doctor and you've been invalided home from Afghanistan. Quite correctly, I'm afraid.
Well, of course, that's insane. There are hundreds of ways that somebody could limp. But the thing that strikes you about Holmes is that he takes common sense events and finds explanations for them. Well, anyway.
It must speak of a kind of need we have to be saved, I think, or to believe there is something slightly higher than us which is going to come and get us out of this terrible mess we're all in.
It seems that Holmes shines a little brighter for people when things aren't going very well. And things are going wrong in the world.
Banks do not have sufficient capital to make loans.
So I need somebody who can reassure me that there are people out there who can make things right. And right now, we're in a sort of a renaissance of Holmes.
The Sherlock Holmes stories have never been out of print since Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created the character in 1887. Holmes first appeared in a minor Christmas penny press magazine. The story, Study in Scarlet.
At first, I think they attracted very little attention. But after time, when I began the short adventures, people began to recognize that it was different than the old detective.
He wrote 60 stories, 4 novels, and 56 short stories.
They began to buy the magazine. It prospered, and so I may say did I.
American publishers were paying Conan Doyle $1 a word. Now, in the 1920s, that is very, very big money indeed.
After the Bible, the Holmes stories are the most widely circulated and translated books in the world.
It's often said that he's the most depicted fictional character, certainly the most filmed fictional character. I think it's because of the strange sort of glamour that he possesses. It's a rather uneasy sort of glamour because he is a glacial and frightening character.
Oh, Professor Moriarty.
But he's rather like a character from Gothic fiction.
How fresh.
Just in. Used to work here. I knew him. He was nice.
He's rather like a vampire.
Dark glamour is just one aspect of Holmes that has left its permanent mark on popular culture.
So, bad day was it?
Another is fandom. Nowadays, millions of people live in the fantasy world of their favorite TV and film heroes.
The Klingon universe is really no different than any other universe.
The fictional Sherlock Holmes started it all. Prior to Doyle's creation, there had never been a pop culture character more famous than its creator. People got confused. Was Sherlock Holmes a real person?
The curious thing is how many people around the world who are perfectly convinced that he is a living human being.
That idea of understanding the character as real began even as the stories were being written.
I'll bet you if you go down Baker Street and stop a random 10 people and ask them a question like, did you know that Sherlock Holmes lived here? I'll bet you that 6 or 7 out of those 10 will say, yes, I did.
I get letters addressed to him. I get letters asking for his autograph. Get letters addressed to his rather stupid friend, Watson.
Would you like to hear old Uncle make a noise like a duck? Oh, sorry?
Sherlock Holmes was the first fictional figure who inspired role-playing among his fans. Today, fan fantasy is a part of popular culture.
Before there were all of these little niches and little pop culture tribes and little pockets of fandom, there was this incredibly potent character that just reached out and shaped all of these other things. The same people who watch Law and Order today are not the same people who are dressing up as Klingons at Star Trek conventions, but they all owe a debt to Holmes.
There are Sherlock Holmes groups in Britain, many in the United States. Japan is mad for Sherlock Holmes. Doyle sort of hit something universal.
We all know it's not real.
I do know that it isn't real.
But it made all that genre escapism legitimate. And it's a nice, enjoyable intellectual exercise.
When Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had enough of Holmes, he decided to kill him. Holmes and his arch-nemesis Moriarty fell over a waterfall in the 1891 classic, The Final Problem. The public outcry was off the scale.
There was an outrage, and people in the City of London went around wearing black armbands, mourning armbands. A woman allegedly wrote to Conan Doyle saying, "You brute."
I've written a good deal more about him than I ever intended to do, but my hand has been rather forced by kind friends who continually wanted to know more.
Slowly, slowly, he was able to usher him back in.
He killed Holmes! He killed Sherlock! Watson, you?
There's something Christ-like about Holmes. He's the man who dies and rises again. He falls quite a long way, but he comes back. And I think that's one of the reasons why he inspires that kind of following.
Holmes has survived through to the 21st century in ways his creator could never have imagined.
He cannot be contained now. He's out in the culture like a kind of disease or a germ, and he'll go on infecting the culture, I'm sure, forever.
There is nothing nicer than to start a Sherlock Holmes story and, you know, the wind was blowing a storm down Baker Street and the fire was crackling in the hearth and Sherlock Holmes cast aside a newspaper and took his first pipe of the day and said, "I'm bored, Watson." And then you hear the client's foot upon the stair and you know that they're going to be off and racing and running.
You know, I owe you an apology. You come here for adventure, and I've none to offer you.
Very soon, out of London's teeming millions, some distressed person will step up to the door and knock.
Ring, Watson. The knocker doesn't function. You should have noticed that.
First stop on Planet Holmes, the crime lab. Sherlock Holmes' most critical contribution to the modern world unfolds in crime labs and morgues all over the planet. When Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote his Holmes stories, there was no such thing as forensic science. E.J. Wagner is the author of The Science of Sherlock Holmes.
It wasn't called forensic science. It was called usually medical jurisprudence. Originally, this was the area of physicians who would call in various experts who knew something about shoes or fine wines and sort of use their knowledge. There was no organization for it at all at the Metropolitan Police, which was itself very new.
Impertinent. She called us policemen.
And what's wrong with being a policeman?
In the late Victorian era, late 1800s, policing in London left a lot to be desired.
The crime scenes in those days were simply chaotic. Crime like Jack the Ripper, for instance. The bodies were not sketched properly in situ. Evidence disappeared. Evidence was never collected. Evidence was deliberately destroyed because they were afraid of causing riots, which was very well meant, but it didn't get anywhere towards solving the crime. Sherlock Holmes says in one of the stories, a greater mess could not have been made if a herd of elephants had blundered through. Well, that is pretty much what happened. They had no method.
One of the first principles in solving crime is never to disregard anything, no matter how trivial.
If Sherlock Holmes had been running the investigation, each of those bodies would have been examined very, very carefully as they lay, as they were found, not after they were removed to the morgue, where things fell off, dropped off, evidence was lost.
Holmes made people realize that forensics and deductive reasoning, these are methods that we need to use. Even today, police forces around the world, universities who teach forensic crime scene investigation use Sherlock Holmes and quote Sherlock Holmes in lessons as the model.
Cleanly, expertly severed. The work of a skilled surgeon.
He helped lay the foundation for this kind of modern crime scene investigation.
It always annoyed me how in the old-fashioned detective story, the detective always seemed to get at his results by some sort of lucky chance or a fluke.
Let's leave jumping to conclusions to the professional detective.
Conan Doyle was a physician, and there is a great deal in forensic science which is really based on medical procedures.
And I used, as a student, to have an old professor, his name was Bell, who was extraordinarily quick at deductive work.
Joseph Bell would very often bring before his class some unfortunate sufferer of a mysterious, complex disease.
But he would make his diagnosis of the disease entirely by his power of observation.
He certainly had a tremendous influence on Conan Doyle, and therefore on Sherlock Holmes.
So naturally, I thought to myself, well, if a scientific man like Bell was to come into the detective business, he wouldn't do these things by chance. He'd get the thing by building it up, scientifically.
Proof, my dear fellow. We must have proof.
The Sherlock Holmes stories caught the attention of a French doctor, Edmond Locard, in the 1920s. Locard worked with police to solve crimes and developed a theory that all things leave a trace. Forensic science was born. He wrote that Sherlock Holmes inspired his groundbreaking theories on trace evidence, and he set the course for the next century's CSIs.
Sherlock Holmes taught them. Locard said he thought everyone studying forensic science should read Sherlock Holmes, especially The Sign of 4.
In the first place, it's been bleached and soaked by long immersion in salt water. Yes, if you'd like to taste it once. Does it?
The Holmes stories featured an array of forensic tools: chemical analysis, microscopic inspection, footprint identification, ballistics, handwriting analysis, gunpowder residue, typography, photographic enlargements. All of these devices appeared in fiction before any were actually used by real CSIs. And today, many forensic scientists admit Holmes' love of the lab is only half of their job. The other half is his love for intrigue.
I love puzzles, and this is a puzzle. You're trying to figure out what happened.
My mind rebels at stagnation.
I grew up on mystery novels as a kid. Getting the answer has always been something. I love information.
Give me the most abstruse cryptogram, the most intricate analysis, and I'm in my proper atmosphere.
I just love it. When I was 7, I wrote stories about people getting murdered and me solving the crimes.
Holmes' love for cutting-edge science inspires the current generation of forensic analysts who specialize in fields Doyle could never have imagined.
This is a typical condition that we'll get a cell phone in.
This expert retrieves data from cell phones that have been smashed by criminals trying to erase electronic evidence of their whereabouts. It's the kind of data collection that Doyle invented with the fictional Holmes.
It was method, he said. You collect all these small facts, data, 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 and then I will put it together, and I will come out with a satisfactory conclusion.
All we need to do at this point is press read. It's reading all of the information from the chip. The word voicemail is in here, so we know that there's probably some kind of voicemail.
Broken fibers appear darker than the rest of the paper and are therefore visible. Splendid, Holmes. I believe Dr. Tobel meant to communicate with us by that means.
In 1893, Doyle wrote about the unique character of handwriting, 15 years before it was ever used in a real case. Today, that tradition continues in this CSI's lab.
This is called the Video Spectral Comparator, or VSC for short. And basically, this just uses different wavelengths of light to distinguish between inks.
The message was written in ink with this pen?
No, he used a pencil. This one.
Thank you.
So in this case, we have an individual who's found dead, and a bunch of things have been obliterated in the daytimer.
If we immerse this sheet in a solution of fluorescent salts, the fibers broken by the writing will absorb less of the solution than other parts of the paper.
And so you can see here that we're seeing lunch with Sue underneath the scribble, and that's because under this infrared light, the lunch with Sue ink is absorbing the infrared.
Watson, I'm beginning to see the plan.
Holmes believed that data could be proved useful no matter how obscure. He collected hundreds of types of tobacco, so that no matter what the criminal smoked, Holmes would know how to narrow his search. That premise drives 21st century forensics.
What Holmes was doing really was saying, collect your data and don't form your theory until you have it. Know a lot about a lot of different things. He was sort of a one-person walking crime laboratory. He even beat corpses to see where the bruises would form, because that's another very big problem to this day. Did this bruising take place as post-mortem or ante-mortem? How did this happen?
Dr. Joseph Bell inspired Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to use the autopsy as a crime-solving tool. Doyle popularized it in fiction long before it was put into practice. And today, the autopsy is the universal standard.
At the end of the day, we are death investigators. This individual who is deceased is our patient, so to speak, and we are the last people who are ever going to examine that individual and get as close to the truth as we possibly can.
Modern tools make the autopsy even more powerful than Conan Doyle could ever have imagined.
Traditionally, the autopsy looks at the organs in the chest and abdominal area. However, when you start using a CT scan, you can start seeing parts of the body such as the internal portions of the extremities, the muscles, the bones. So having this technology really provides a huge amount of additional information. And in some cases, has eliminated the need to do an autopsy as long as the pertinent questions were answered by the scan.
But with all the advancements, old-school Sherlockian forensics are still going strong. In The Adventure of the Reggate Squire, Doyle introduced the notion of ballistics analysis to determine which gun fired a bullet. That practice continues, and today's forensic experts agree with Sherlock Holmes that no two weapons are the same.
We're constantly trying to disprove our theory to where we are taking consecutively manufactured firearms, we are test firing them, trying to compare them to each other, trying to make the firearm that was made first match with a firearm that was made second. And to this date, it has still not been done. So we can still prove, and have been proven over and over again, that we can in fact identify fired bullets and fired cartridge cases back to a firearm.
In 1887's A Study in Scarlet, Sherlock Holmes analyzed blood to determine who it came from. 13 years pass before this technique is put into practice. And almost a century goes by before the advent of DNA testing.
The DNA profiles tests for hair color, eye color, ethnicity, height, weight, and other physical traits. It just continues to grow and grow. The techniques are so robust and reliable, and they just keep improving, and the discriminatory power keeps improving.
Sherlock's influence on criminologists and their methods runs deeper than any other real historical figure. That says a lot for a man who never lived. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes had an unusual talent, hiding in plain sight.
Holmes was a master of disguise.
Hands up, gentlemen.
Oh, why, it's Mr. Holmes.
Holmes! Put that thing away now, Watson.
Watson said that the stage lost an actor when Holmes decided to become a detective.
An admirable disguise, by the way. Fooled them completely. Of course, it didn't fool me. I never intended that it should.
He would immerse himself in the character. He had several bolt holes around London that were equipped with makeup and costume that he could retire to and emerge as somebody else. Completely different identity. Whether it was a drunken groom or an Italian priest or a up-and-coming plumber, Holmes actually became the character. His mastery of that technique was really a pioneering thing.
Sherlock Holmes. Improvement on the other makeup. Don't you think so, Professor?
The tradition of going undercover lives on in police forces around the world.
I think some of them are slightly embarrassed, to tell you the truth, about how much they are influenced by what they read when they were 14.
Dragan Miladovich, 52 years old, a multidisciplinary organized crime figure with massive connections.
A team of former undercover cops now runs a top private investigation firm in Canada. The team is about to close in on a deadly drug dealer, using techniques straight from the pages of Sherlock Holmes.
Just so you know, this guy's got a record dating back to 1983, assault convictions and an assault causing.
Miladovich is 6'1", 320 pounds. He's been involved in martial arts for about 40 years. He's an absolute bone crusher. He does a lot of dirty work for the Hells Angels, and he's hurt a lot of people. I will be posing as the boss of mock criminal organization this afternoon.
To complete his risky job, Fred Pinnock dons a simple but effective disguise.
There are many occasions where deception and trickery have to be used to have people responsible for criminal acts divulge long-held evidence or admissions.
My dear Watson, if we're to catch our fishes, we must use the bait they bite on.
On the surveillance, Julia, you're going to be wired, so I need you to let your hair down to cover that earpiece. Jake, you're going to ride with Len. Julia, you ride with me.
Make no mistake, Watson. This is our greatest antagonist, Professor Moriarty. You've got to beat him.
Dragan is a dangerous guy. There's a history of violence. Having said that, I've gained his trust over the past year. He's aware of the deal. He's, eager to make it happen. I'm confident that he believes it's legitimate.
General Samuel Wilson is a career spy, a master of deception.
Sherlock Holmes was one of the early practitioners of deception. Deception is engaging in acts that mislead, confuse, discombobulate an opponent, cause him to take actions that are not in his best interest, but may be in yours, or not to act when he should act.
I'm always eager to get it going. We're just waiting for his call, so it'll be calling in a couple minutes. So, hello.
Once you get your phone call from Fred that they're in place, then get him in the car and drive him over there.
The criminal steps straight into the trap.
Holmes had a way of smoking people out. Holmes confused, misled people to where they suddenly appeared and he had them in their grasp.
I would say you were wrong and Mr. Sherlock Holmes was correct.
Good evening, Professor Moriarty.
A single slip-up, and the undercover agents could find themselves in a deadly situation.
You will meet and greet our subject. Before he gets in the car, I want you to check him out, make sure he's got nothing on him that he shouldn't have. Okay, then let him in the car.
Now, the moment of greatest danger.
Who do we have here?
How are you?
Doing fine.
It's a moment that echoes Holmes.
Who's this bloke?
He's a bloodthirsty heathen, but there's good money to spend for information.
I recognize Sherlock Holmes, as we would say, fine Italian hand in the business of deception, of which he was a master.
You get 6,000 units?
Approximately, yes. It will cost you $40 per unit.
40 per unit? Yeah. How fast can this happen?
As soon as you get me the money, within about, I would say within 24 hours.
Okay, Will has the cash right now.
Good. I think maybe at some time we will become good friends.
Yeah.
Good friends do good business.
Yeah.
I never did think much of this dressing up business. It was necessary, I assure you.
Another violent criminal is caught in the snare, thanks to the art of disguise inspired by Sherlock Holmes. But his undercover influence doesn't end there. Others consider Holmes the master spy, the model for the 21st century's high-stakes game of espionage. General Sam Wilson is one of the United States' most decorated spies. For what exactly, he will never say. But he will admit that it all started reading Sherlock Holmes stories as a boy.
I found so much that was deep and substantive, meaningful and rich in Holmes as a figure and in the intellectual feats that he was able to achieve. I simply found myself fascinated with it.
Wilson worked for 10 U.S. presidents as a secret agent, never revealing his own secret. Sherlock Holmes was his silent protector.
I absorbed Holmes and his life and was aware of his thesis that the human mind is a most powerful tool if it is finely honed and educated and concentrated on solving problems. Holmes to me was a problem solver. The intricacies of his mind simply appealed to me very, very greatly. And I think they were a benefit to me as I've moved into intelligence as a career.
Spies never retire. They just work in the shadows. And General Wilson now imagines what might have happened if intelligence officials had used Sherlock Holmes as their model to catch Osama bin Laden.
Sherlock Holmes would have found Osama bin Laden for us much sooner. We can't keep secrets these days. One of the things that we always preached was how to avoid the spotlight at the end of the action. Or you just fade away. Holmes was good at this. Give the credit and the publicity to someone else. Let's fade away into the shadows so we can work again another day.
By the way, they left this statue behind. It's probably of no value.
No value? Why, it's full of sparklers. You amateurs always overlook the important things.
Sherlock Holmes set the stage for the dangerous world of modern undercover operations, master of the art of being invisible in plain sight. Every day, human hunters stalk the streets, looking for opportunities to commit violent crimes. In the late 20th century, criminologists realized that most of these predators follow recognizable patterns. Police call it behavioral science, or more simply, profiling. And in 1887's Study in Scarlet, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle anticipated profiling by almost 100 years.
This makes 4, Inspector. 4 defenseless women here in the heart of London.
Lee Rainbow is the UK's top criminal profiler, a modern Sherlock.
I think certainly in terms of crime scene assessment, what we do is very similar to the Holmes approach in gathering data, using the data to drive the theory rather than vice versa, and hypothesis generation and testing, to search for further data to support or refute those hypotheses, and then coming up with the best fit for the known information, which is essentially what Holmes was using. One of our roles is to very much recognise that the theory should fit the data, not the data fitting the theory, and that's very much what we do.
The truth is only arrived at by the painstaking process of eliminating the untrue. We are not able to do that in this case without further data.
Everything we do is driven by data, everything.
There's a tendency to glamorize, romanticize the intelligence operator, the James Bond. That is the exciting arena. That's where the headlines are. There's a tendency to ignore faceless analysts laboring, putting bits and pieces of evidence together and trying to figure out what they mean. And that's Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes spanned pretty much the field of deception, collection operations, and so on. But when I stopped to think about who and what he was, I would say first and foremost, the world's greatest intelligence analyst.
One cutting-edge technique owes its inspiration to the Holmesian method. It's called geographic profiling, and it's proven to narrow down where a violent offender hunts and even where he lives. Ian Laverty is one of the creators of a geoprofiling program inspired by Sherlock Holmes.
Well, to start with, in geographic profiling, you need a series of connected locations. It's like the old pin maps that the police used to put on the wall, stick little pins in the map, and then they'd stare at the pattern and say, I wonder what this means. So what we do is enter the crime locations into the program, and it does the very complicated calculation, actually, where it runs through the entire city. If the criminal lived here and he traveled to all of these crime sites, how long would it take him? And then it moves over a little bit. And as you do that, you're building up a probability map that shows you where the criminal is more likely to live over the entire city.
We thought we were the hunters, instead of which we're the hunted.
Scott Filer is a profiler and private investigator in Canada.
People commit crimes for a reason. People think it's random. It's really not a random process. There are reasons that people choose to do things the way they do. And that's the premise behind the software. It takes all those scientific considerations into play when the algorithm behind the software is working. These maps allow us to prioritize the search area for the suspect.
Sherlock Holmes was all about applying his knowledge with a little bit of intuition. And he was a very smart guy. But what we have that he didn't have is a whole lot of information. He had the kids that ran around the streets gathering information for him, but we have the modern equivalent in the computer tools that we use, and they have a whole lot more information to go on. If Sherlock Holmes is around today, he'd have apps like ours on his smartphone, and he'd be using them all the time.
But Lee Rainbow points out that despite computers, the data still needs a detective, like Holmes, to make sense of it.
You still need that human aspect to it, to identify which are the important variables. Those things can't be done by a computer.
There's something in that bag she wants to show me.
What makes you say that?
Bag doesn't match her dress, indicating it was picked for size rather than style, to accommodate some bulky object.
You amaze me, Holmes.
Elementary, my dear fellow.
Anybody can get in front of a computer and punch keys and make something come out of it. What goes into that is the human factor. Holmes was an expert in logic, reasoning out explanations, looking at the evidence that remains, and putting the puzzle together. So at the end of the day, what comes out of it is an informed hypothesis about what you think happened between the victim and the suspect. That's the critical piece. It's about the analyst and the skills and knowledge that the analyst brings to the process that makes it successful.
Sometimes, when the profilers hit a dead end, old-school lie detection comes into play. Theo Hollenby is one of the world's top polygraphic analysts.
I think that Holmes probably would have appreciated the instrument like that, to be very honest with you, because he used the powers of observation to see if somebody was sweating or that his heart was beating faster than normal.
I was studying the faces of our fellow passengers. Fascinating hobby, and sometimes most enlightening.
You can actually see that his body is reacting when you ask him that certain type of question.
The polygraph has been a forensic tool since Conan Doyle's time, and it's still going strong.
At the moment, it is still the best tool to use in any investigation, according to me. There's a lot of other scientific ways to investigate, statement analysis or the reading of the body. But with a polygraph, you can actually put something on paper. You can say the body reacted to a certain question at that time, and this is what the body did. Did you steal that watch?
No.
Many profilers admit their model was Sherlock Holmes, a fictional character who used deduction to close in on criminals that were too elusive for standard police methods.
It's very Holmes. I make it akin to doing a crossword puzzle. You know, you get one piece of data that starts giving you a clue for the next. You slowly build up this picture, which is very intellectually challenging, like a crossword. But the completion of that crossword is you catch a bad guy. And for me, it's a perfect role, perfect job. I love it. I really do. Yeah.
What are you thinking of? I'm thinking of all the women who can come and go in safety in the streets of London tonight.
Sherlock Holmes is known all over the planet, but his influence also reaches into space, inspiring NASA scientist Dr. James Garvin.
Science operates in a lot of different ways, but perhaps at the most visceral level, it's very forensic. All of us who are fans of that 221B Baker Street idea recognized in reading those stories of more than 100 plus years ago that this is science applied to understanding.
Garvin was an intern when NASA first put a camera on Mars in 1975. He's now the agency's top scientist. He's defined NASA's direction for space exploration and owes it all to reading Sherlock Holmes as a little boy.
Sherlock Holmes, I might have known.
I really came into science by being curious, as all young people probably are. They may not realize it, but they are. I mean, I like rocks and bugs, but other kids like beating up their neighborhood kid or sister, whatever it is. It's that curiosity. But once you read the Sherlock Holmes stories and you see the interplay between thinking, evidence, solving something that matters, you know, death of people kind of does, you realize that's what science is. We are crime solvers, but the crimes are the problem you're solving. Ocean heat flow, climate stories on Earth, why Venus is so weird, whether life exists on Mars or the bigger universe, are we alone? I read Holmes before I became a scientist.
What Garvin learned from the Sherlock Holmes stories is that data comes first. Theories follow.
Nothing but an ordinary match folder. Where does that lead us?
I imagine to something very important, Gregson.
And with that, a generation of scientists regards space as a Holmesian mystery that needs to be solved.
How do we figure these things out? How do we make it into that puzzle-solving forensic science that Sherlock Holmes demonstrated in these great stories? And We do so with data, with information, and we increase that information in ways that is like increasing the pool of evidence you would have in a mystery, in a crime story. What's the puzzle of water on Mars? Well, we went to Mars. We saw a dry, alien, apparently sterile desert. We landed, we sat there for years, nothing really much happened. And then, revolution. The forensic puzzle changed. We got a little more information, as Holmes did in the stories by Sir Conan Doyle. And you put the extra piece of information in, and even though it might seem small, kaboom! We now have the wet, warm Mars, the Mars where following the water makes sense. Today, following the carbon. It's so Holmesian, and I think that's what is attractive to some of us scientists. We kind of operate like Sherlock Holmes did, 140, 50 years ago, but with new pieces of data.
NASA's role has evolved. The agency now studies scientific mysteries on Earth as much as the stars. But Garvin says Sherlock Holmes' methods still rule his vision. Listen to the facts. Then, make your analysis.
The 19th key of the keyboard is the 19th letter of the alphabet.
Garvin and his team went back to the moon missions and found new evidence in old data.
Seemingly a dead world. We visited it with astronauts 40 years ago. Been there, done that. In fact, that's not the case. The moon is actually a repository of information about the whole solar system, and we've just come to realize that from the new evidence we're getting from new missions. So it's all about the information. We get it from every perspective we can. That's very Holmesian. Those pieces of evidence give us the story where we can play the Holmesian game, and that's what's so beautiful. We're discovering our own future and our future questions.
From the moon to the stars, Sherlock Holmes' influence stretches deep into space exploration. But back on Earth, it's driven popular culture in ways that cannot be measured. Sherlock Holmes has been imitated and adapted more than any other fictional character in history.
Mr. Holmes! Mr. Sherlock Holmes!
Good morning, Mr. Holmes.
Mr. Holmes?
Good night, Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created a character who exploded onto the world of fiction and has left his mark on 3 centuries.
We are living in Sherlock Holmes' world. There are just so many creators of fictional universes who are inspired by Holmes. You could go back and say that Holmes was the Model T of all modern science fiction, of mystery fiction, of genre fiction.
All right, Cato, we're going to introduce Mr. Grant and the world to the Green Hornet.
The marks of it are on every mystery novel, every detective figure, and every conflict between the rational and the irrational, from the X-Files to the Lost to the police procedurals.
I want to report a murder. Who was murdered? I was.
It all comes back to Holmes. It's hard to find something in modern entertainment that Sherlock Holmes did not touch in one way or another.
Holmes is a character who conjured something so powerful and so vital that that character just escaped and went running through the culture. And it had a power that Doyle couldn't tame.
A lot of people have written pastiche Sherlock Holmes stories. The new Sherlock Holmes series at the BBC was a startling success.
But why has Sherlock Holmes remained so popular?
The great Sherlock Holmes himself.
Many believe it's all about his relationship with Dr. Watson.
Watson never heard. Who, me?
I think the real allure is the duo of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Their relationship, the milieu that they inhabit.
Hi, how are you, boy? I haven't seen you for years. I want you to meet my old friend Sherlock Holmes. Holmes, this is Stinky.
Sherlock Holmes had become so much about the trappings, about the fog, about the top hats, about the hansom cabs, that at a stroke, by modernizing it, it becomes about them again, which is the friendship between these two men.
buddy film genre began with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
Watson! Coming home!
Buddy films owe a tremendous amount to Sherlock Holmes, obviously. And you'll notice that these duos tend to kind of have the same sort of interplay that Holmes and Watson had.
I think the idea of a pairing of two men, one of whom is rather distant and unknowable, and one of whom is much more like us, I think this is terribly important.
You don't mind breaking the law?
Not in a good cause.
Oh, the cause is excellent.
Well, then I am your man.
Splendid.
It's like he's crazy, but he's crazy because he sees everything as it is. That's what makes him crazy, and it's also what makes him great. That's pure Holmes.
You can see it in Lethal Weapon. You can see it in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You can see it in Star Trek, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. Before all of them, though, there was Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. That's the prototype.
And action.
In the 21st century, the Holmes-Watson relationship has taken on a new dimension.
The homoerotic buddy cop combination as we know it today owes just about everything to Holmes and Watson. Holmes himself was extremely ambiguous, didn't show a whole lot of interest in women. Irene Adler was the only woman who fascinated him.
What the relationship between Holmes and Watson captures is a kind of intimate male relationship that, in a way, predates those categories of sexuality that we're all stuck with now.
Holmes, I think your visitor will want me out of the way.
Not a bit, Doctor. Stay where you are. I am lost without my Boswell.
There was a very definite homoerotic vibe to the relationship depicted in the Granada TV series, largely thanks to Jeremy Brett's performance, I think. And it's now a running gag in the new BBC Sherlock series, because all the people they meet, of course, assume that they're rather more than flatmates.
There's another bedroom upstairs if you've been needing 2 bedrooms.
Of course we'll be needing 2.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle would have denied the implication. Male relationships in his era were different. But there is one thing in the stories that was not ambiguous. Sherlock Holmes was a cocaine addict. His favorite method, injecting what he called the 7% solution.
The fact that he was a drug addict, the fact that he's a bit of a sociopath, that's an incredibly potent thing in fiction. The hero who is also potentially a demon or has something demonic inside him that both gives him his power and makes him a liability, that's incredibly powerful.
Addicted, superheroic, sociopathic, scientific, genius. Sherlock Holmes anticipated the future. A complex, flawed character, so worshipped, some people forget that he never existed.
We're going to be having a gathering of Sherlock Holmes people in the city where I live, in Oxford. There is a pub there where Sherlock Holmes undoubtedly stayed because of internal evidence in the stories. And, you know, I've just been writing the chronology of what the guests are going to do. And they will, you know, I'm going to say, just think, when you actually go in there, Sherlock Holmes really did stay here! Exclamation mark.
We're talking about him like he's real. We can't help ourselves, can we? I mean, we're not saying Arthur Conan Doyle did it, are we? We're saying that Sherlock Holmes did it.
I mean, I do know that he isn't real.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle dropped a fictional character on our planet, and he hit like a bomb. The ripple effect of Sherlock Holmes shows no sign of stopping over a century later. In a world that doesn't often make sense, cold, calculated reason gives people a feeling of safety and strength. Holmes appears in the strangest of places because we need him.
Good work, Mr. Holmes. Perhaps I underestimated you.
I've written a good deal more about him than I ever intended to do, but my hand has been rather forced by kind friends who continually wanted to know more. And so it is that this monstrous growth has come out of what was really a comparatively small seed. Oh, goodbye. I'm alive.